So, despite the fact that he is the Hoosier president, what is your relationship with our 23rd president, Benjamin Harrison?
I used to live next to his house.
I
Yes.
have also been to the Benjamin Harrison house once, and I just had a few hours to kill before getting on my plane. I was like, ha, I want to go to the house of the least famous president we've ever had. All right, now we're going to go into the segment that we call Before They Were President or Things We Read on Wikipedia. So, Benjamin Harrison, if you didn't get a clue from the last name Harrison, is the grandson of our ninth president, William Henry Harrison, who, if you watch The Simpsons, know died in 30 days. He is also the son of a congressman, and he was born in 1833 in North Bend, Ohio. That's right, even the Indiana president is from Ohio. Moral of the story, Ohio runs the country. All right. So he had a privileged upbringing, despite the fact that he grew up on a farm. The farm itself was on his grandpa's compound of awesomeness, just sort of like the whole I'm president. So therefore I was president for a month. Therefore I have good things.
Go more
Um,
into his grandfather's or his privileged upbringing, because the research I did said that he was more
he had
privileged than the ones that grew up in four walls and a roof, and
yeah,
like
he
he
had
wasn't
like a
homeless, but he had an education.
well, when most people didn't have water.
Yeah.
And it's like he had it pretty good. And
Yeah.
I did read that as a young kid, he was a voracious reader and took advantage of the fact that his grandpa left a very well-stocked library.
Oh.
This naturally sparked an interest in law and governance. So he went to Miami University in Ohio, where Ohio rules the world. He then he graduated near the top of his class. So I think he can empathize with William Howard Taft on that front, who, if you listen to our first episode, no, he only graduated second at Yale. What a moron. As a very young man, he met the woman who would become his first wife and the love of his life by all accounts, Carolyn Lavina Scott. She was an older woman. She was 21 when he was 20. So, scandalous relationship, married a cougar. In 1853, they had two kids. Although he was born in Ohio, he got his education in Ohio, he met his wife in Ohio. He then moved to Indianapolis in 1854, where he practiced law until an unfortunate event called the Civil War
Yeah.
called him out of his law practice. So even before the Civil War happened, he was getting involved in the growing Republican Party movement. So he campaigned for the first presidential nominee, John C. Fremont, and then campaigned for a guy named Abraham Lincoln. Have you heard of Abraham Lincoln?
A little known president.
Yeah, he's like John Tyler, just really obscure.
Sure.
Anyway, so as fate would have it, Abraham Lincoln did get the Republican nomination and did become president, and it turned out okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he joined the 70th Indiana Infantry Regiment, where he obtained the rank of Brigadier General. For the second episode in a row, we are dealing with Civil War generals who then became president. It's a nice through line from general in the Civil War into, commander in chief.
I mean,
they were so hot at the time.
The timeline kind of makes sense because most of the forgotten presidents were between like the 1880 and like 1915,
1900.
1900.
Well, we're going to get to this later on, but here's my review of Benjamin Harrison.
Yeah.
He's Teddy Roosevelt without charisma.
Which
is why no one remembers him.
Yeah.
Because if you look at his accomplishments, which we will get to, and there's a lot. I mean, he's a mediocre president, but I mean, he essentially set up the groundwork for the big stick diplomacy.
Yeah.
I said stick. Get your mind out of the gutter.
Yeah.
Diplomacy that Theodore Roosevelt became famous for. But he was not only just a general, unlike our last president, Chester A. Arthur, Benjamin Harrison actually did get his hands dirty. He had the benefit of not having a Confederate wife at home to force him to sleep on the couch. So he actually was involved with General Sherman's storming of Atlanta. And unlike some other generals from the Civil War, he didn't look back in this time fondly. He was proud to be a general. He preferred the title General Harrison over President Harrison. But he was largely traumatized by the ugliness of war that he
Yeah,
saw. But
that
when he
makes
came
sense.
back, he was largely charged up from the experience of the Civil War. Came back to practice law, but he wanted to get more involved in politics. So he became an Indianapolis city attorney and served as the state reporter for the Supreme Court of Indiana. The dude was seriously in love with his state, and as you are an Indianian, I imagine you appreciate that.
Yeah, Indiana's awesome. Like it's I've been all over the world and through most states in the country. And the beautiful thing about Indianapolis especially is that if someone's annoyed by you and you're not like harassing them too much or whatever, they'll probably just ignore you until you go away. It's awesome.
I love the Midwest.
Yeah.
We're very good at that passive aggressiveness.
Passive aggressiveness. Oh,
All right.
and guns.
Oh yeah, and corn. Don't forget corn.
Yeah.
All right. As he was very fond of his Indiana heritage, even though he was born in Ohio,
Yeah.
he did pursue the governorship of Indiana unsuccessfully. Only got the nomination once, but from 1881 to 1887, he served as a senator from Indiana. And while he was a senator, he set up his whole groundwork for everything that he was interested in pursuing as president. So, among the things that he pushed for as a senator were pensions for Civil War vets, which was probably pretty close to home because he was a Civil War vet.
Sure.
Derwin, I think the lesson here is if we want better benefits, we should run for Senate. So,
No.
are you sure about that? Because I mean, like, like we'll be the ones making the rules.
Have you
By the
seen
way,
those people in the Senate? Like, no.
yeah, no,
Like
it's okay.
state senate or national any senate, no. I like being left alone. Like I'm a Hoosier now. Like
You could be a Hoosier in DC.
no.
Okay, well, it was worth a shot. So he was fond of the idea of westward expansion, which will become a bigger issue later on in the story. High protective tariffs. So the guy wanted everyone to buy domestic. Tariffs are another ongoing issue. They're a very unpopular issue, but and limited civil service reform, which, if you listen to our Chester A. Arthur episode, is kind of the thing that got James Garfield killed. Following the Civil War, the Republican Party was the new hotness. However, it was split up between the stalwarts and the unfortunately named half-breeds. And the stalwarts were fond of the good old boy program, in which if you supported the president, you could get any civil service job you wanted. Just saying, things could have been different if James Garfield didn't get killed.
That's true.
James Garfield, also from Ohio.
Yeah.
Bing. And he actually, speaking of Chester A. Arthur and some unfortunate parts of his legacy. So Benjamin Harrison, this is another like check in the he's a good person box. He did split with the Republican Party on one very important act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, which, as you may recall from just hearing the name, was an act to exclude Chinese immigrants from coming into the country, which from the vantage point of the 21st century seems pretty cut and dry, but people were super racist back in the 19th
A little
century.
bit. A little bit. Racist on the nose, no coded language or anything. Just right.
They didn't even give it like a fun, like, well, this is the Blaine Exclusion Act. Who does it exclude? Oh, just people from China.
Yeah.
No, they called it just on the nose.
Yeah.
Chinese Exclusion Act. And Benjamin Harrison, to his credit, was like, could we not?
I like
kind of picking on one country.
I liked his stance on like, hey, so we should treat our black citizens like they're human beings.
And Native Americans.
Yeah. And he was like, hey, so maybe we should let them vote and like not harass them while they're trying to vote. And I'm like, that sounds good. I like that. Very progressive for his time. and how like he wanted to, because he was also a big conservationist, right? And he wanted to like protect the buffalo, but also we were busy fighting an extermination war with the Native Americans at the time. And so they said, hey, if we protect the buffalo, well, then we're helping the people we're fighting. And so he couldn't get that to pass. Am I right there?
Yeah. There's another reoccurring pattern, and we'll jump ahead to the 1888 election, because then it'll segue into a few points.
Yeah.
In 1888, he was elected president. Now, what I love about Benjamin Harrison, and one of the few things that people just generally know if they have a basic understanding, is that he defeated Grover Cleveland as president, and then 4 years later lost to Grover Cleveland as president.
Oh,
so
boy.
he's the meat in the Grover Cleveland sandwich. So it's a unique position for him to be in.
That doesn't sound like a position anybody wants to be in, Pete.
Yeah. Ew.
Yeah.
So he ran under the slogan of rejuvenated republicanism, which sounds like some weird Dr. Seussian nonsense, but it's alliterative. But like a lot of people in the pre-television era, he did actually pre-radio, and we'll get to that in a minute. He did the front porch campaign. So if you have been to the Benjamin Harrison house, as Derwin and I both have, he would actually just invite people to his front porch. Super dangerous in hindsight, by the way, considering how many people got shot back then. But he would just invite people to his front porch and say, this is what I would do if I were president. So the front porch campaign was kind of successful because he lost the popular vote, but he won the electoral vote. And how did he do that? Because he won the important swing state of what? Indiana.
What? Really?
Actually, he did win New York City too, but Indiana was at the time considered to be an important swing state.
Wow. It's so different now.
Well, the idea of New York was an important swing state. We talked about in the Chester A. Arthur episode. It was like, it was so important that they won the popular state of New York because such a swing state. Like New York hasn't been a swing state for over 100 years. There's a lot of political change that reading about history, you're like, oh, okay, so the world was very different.
This is
not
1888,
too long ago.
Right?
1888.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So as president, Benjamin Harrison followed through on a lot of his actions as senator. As you pointed out, he was a huge conservationist. One of the few things that he actually did get signed into law was the Land Revision Act of 1891, which authorized presidents to protect land as national forest. So if you've ever been to Yellowstone National Park, you can thank our boy Benny Harrison. The other big thing that he's known for, and it's still in effect, is the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which was sponsored by Senator John Sherman from the great state of Ohio. My goodness, if we get people tuning us out, it's because they're from the other 49 states. Like, shut up about the Buckeye State.
Talk about Nevada. Talk about Nevada.
Well, we talked about New Mexico with the Warren G. Harding episode, but that was about the Teapot Dome scandal.
Yeah.
So the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first federal act to regulate giant corporations. In a nutshell, it was trying to crack down on monopolies. And as a result, we never had any other monopolies again. Just ask Disney.
Or Google or Facebook or Amazon or
so
one of the 7 companies that people work for.
It was a nice effort.
Yeah.
And it's still in effect. It's not very useful, but it's still in effect.
Yeah.
But let's see. Ooh, this was one thing I never knew about that I think is really exciting about him. So we talked about how Benjamin Harrison, for his time at least, beyond his time, was pretty progressive when it came to racial politics. So one thing I didn't know is that he appointed Frederick Douglass to the minister of Haiti. Minister used to be so essentially the ambassador to Haiti. Some titles have changed around a little bit. So like I didn't know that the guy was friends with Frederick Douglass. That's cool.
Who was Frederick Douglass, Pete?
Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave turned abolitionist turned author. So for a lot of people, he was the first voice of slavery to speak out. He also toured around Great Britain and Ireland to say, did you know slavery is awful? Because I saw firsthand how awful it was. But not to mention, all right, you know what? Another guy's not allowed to hear this, but also great head of hair.
Yeah.
Check out pictures of it. If I had the hair to pull that off, I would. The guy had a great look.
I have a
also apparently, so do I.
Yeah.
But
wasn't he a senator?
No. So actually, I didn't even know. I'm not.
Wasn't like a former slave turned senator, or am I thinking of somebody different?
No, I think what you're thinking. There were former slaves that served in the House of Representatives.
That's probably what I'm thinking of.
And I again, we are both C+ history students. So if there were former slaves turned senators, we don't know about them. So if you know about them, please educate us.
Leave them in the comments, please.
Yeah. Oh, the many comments that we'll get.
Oh, yeah.
But I had no idea that Frederick Douglass served in the executive branch. That's cool.
That's pretty cool.
And Benny Harrison supported that. So I also found out that one thing he has in common with Chester A. Arthur is the same Secretary of State, James Blaine.
Okay.
So James
the
Blaine
Act, you nerd.
Oh yeah, no. It's interesting. You kind of learn just
I just got that.
how small our country was, because James Blaine is the only person to have served as Secretary of State for 3 presidents.
Well, yeah, there's 45 people back then. Like, I
know. So he chose the only person from Maine who isn't a character from a Stephen King book,
yeah,
to be Secretary of State. And so under Benjamin Harrison's regime, we had the first Pan American Conference in October of 1889. They also negotiated with the British to keep them from killing baby seals. Arf, arf.
Yes.
Oh, and this is a big one. Hey, Derwin, do you know anyone from North Dakota, South Dakota, Washington, Montana, Idaho, or Wyoming? So we talked about, as a senator, he was pushing for westward expansion. He added 6 states to our country. And funny enough, the Democrats were pushing against that because they were afraid that all 6 of those states would vote Republican. And you know what? They weren't wrong, because of those 6, only Washington votes Democrat now. But it was in a different political context at the time. And the 1892 election, Grover Cleveland came back with a vengeance. Not really. If I've learned anything from Grover Cleveland, the guy was actually really civil. And both he and Benjamin Harrison had a fine relationship that has had ideological differences. And one beautiful detail I learned is, actually I learned this at the Benjamin Harrison house. Tragically, the First Lady, Carolyn Lavina Scott, died from tuberculosis 2 weeks out from the election. And as a sign of respect, Grover Cleveland stopped campaigning for those last 2 weeks, because obviously Benjamin Harrison was a little bit preoccupied with the "my wife and the mother of my children is dead" thing.
Oh, wow.
By the way, quick shout out to we've talked about the first ladies on other episodes, and mostly we only talk about the really forceful ones, like Nellie Taft or Florence Harding, who essentially were the presidents behind the scene. But with Carolyn Lavina Scott, here's one kind of a cute detail: is she was the first lady to set up a Christmas tree in the White House.
That's cool.
So considering that the first lady is an unofficial title, but it's culturally appreciated, I think as a hostess, she's hosting Christmas parties. That's cool.
It's kind of like America's mom.
Yeah. And so tragically, she did die before the 1892 election. And
I guess if there was like a woman president,
we have a second man right now.
Yeah.
You know, not a first man, but a second man. So I don't know Kamala Harris's husband's name, but you know what? You do your hosting details.
Mr. Harris,
America.
So do you think, like, let's say she becomes president after the current administration, do you think he would be like America's stepdad? Which, I mean, honestly, like, I would rather have that job, because, you know,
wouldn't that be cool?
Maybe my wife will run for president. I'd vote for her and be like, hey, listen.
Well,
like,
I mean, she's a public school teacher, so she's worked for the government before.
Exactly. Be like, listen, you deal with like the nuclear codes and China and whatever, and I'll like tell kids to like eat vegetables and just.
Oh yeah, you could just like take notes from all the first ladies, because like it's like, oh, what did you go for?
Yeah.
Like, what cool things did you introduce to the White House?
Yeah. And just like, I can't walk around in a bathrobe in the Oval Office, right? I get it.
I bet you'd be beloved if you did that. All right. So after losing the 1892 election, Benjamin Harrison returned to the great state of Indiana. You're welcome. Yeah. You get one. Yeah. Where he resumed his law practice. I'm not trying to shame anyone, especially if love is involved, and especially considering that this guy had his heart broken by his wife dying. But we can't neglect the unfortunate reality that is, after his wife died, Benjamin Harrison married Carolyn's niece, who was 25-ish years younger than Benjamin Harrison.
Oh, so many things.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
I come from hill folk, right? And so I've heard stories. So how old was Benjamin Harrison when he married his wife's niece?
Now, I want to say super duper old, but it's also worth noting this was from a time where people didn't live as long. So like he was only 55 when he became president. So I mean, like, he would have been like late 50s, early 60s.
So she would have been like 35.
So it's not quite like 90-year-old marrying a 19-year-old.
Okay, so she's like a grown woman.
And although they're related, it's by law and not by blood. It's still kind of weird.
Weird, but also like when I first learned about it, I thought it was like, oh, she's a teenager and he's 40. No, if she's 30, especially in 1880, 1890, whenever this was, 35 is like what 55 is now, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I get it.
So, I mean, you know what? If it made them both happy and they're both consenting adults, who cares?
It's I'm glad that you told me how old they were, kind of giving me an idea of their ages. But wow, yeah, no, I don't. That's a weird Christmas dinner. Like,
oh yeah. Well, I imagine it would be really weird because all the same relatives would still be over for that wedding.
yeah,
And just sort of like, oh hi, well, we have the seats still saved for you from the last wedding.
yeah, we've
Now the
done this
bride
already.
and groom side has been merged into one.
I
By the
don't know
way,
what kind of hillbilly nonsense that is.
actually, it's less hillbilly than FDR marrying his actual cousin.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, poor Eleanor Roosevelt didn't even have to change her last name for that one.
I
Must have saved her saved a lot of paperwork.
yeah, no.
All right. Well, there's not much to continue. All
Yeah.
that's kind of left for Benjamin Harrison to do is die at this point. But
She
he
gets
lasted a
inheritance.
whole lot longer than his grandpa did as president.
That's good. We should do him next, or at some.
Oh, we absolutely have to because I'm always fascinated by the fact that first off, I love medicine from the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
Because you pretty much just threw bricks at people until they died. um, Be gone! They're possessed by a witch.
I bet if we light him on fire, we can get rid of the blood demons.
Yeah, no, we're going to get to so many presidents who died in office, and it's just fascinating what doctors could get away with back then.
I was telling somebody how excited I was about the COVID-19 vaccine, and I was out walking around today. I was at a burger joint, and I was like, "Yeah." So a magician told me that if he put this potion in my arm, the blood demons would go away, and I was like, "That sounds great, thank you."
Exactly. It's all the verbiage. You start using Latin names, suddenly it sounds a lot more professional.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of caps up the life of our 23rd and one of our more forgotten presidents. So now we get to the questions. Derwin, do you think that Benjamin Harrison deserves a better legacy than what he's got, which is basically nothing?
I mean, it feels about right. Like, because he's kind of like a really efficient placeholder. Like, he didn't ruin it too much. Didn't seem like he, he's like, hey, maybe don't be terrible to black people, and let's not trash the country, and
bare minimum stuff.
Monopolies are bad, like things that should be self-evident, but sometimes you got to say it out loud for the group to understand.
I would say he deserves a little bit better of a legacy than he's got. Because, I mean, if you know me, I've made fun of Benjamin Harrison a lot just because he's kind of the Delaware of presidents.
He is.
You just kind of forget he's there until you see his name. Like, oh yeah. But he was the first president to introduce electricity into the White House. He was the first president to have his voice recorded. Super tinny voice, by the way.
Yeah.
And I had no idea how progressive he was. And as I pointed out at the top of the show, he was basically Teddy Roosevelt before Teddy Roosevelt because the progressive politics, and also he was a huge conservationist.
Yeah.
So he spoke softly and carried a small stick.
Yeah.
Speaking as a natural segue right there,
you're so good.
One of our most important questions we've got here, in honor of Warren G. Harding naming his penis Jerry, what do you think Benjamin Harrison would have named his penis?
Hairless Ben.
Okay. Now, I know that his nickname was the human iceberg because he was a very cold person, not very outgoing. I'm going to say Benjamin Harrison would nickname his penis the Bomb Pop.
The Bomb Pop. I have a question for you, sir.
Oh, I love it.
Would you want him on your zombie survival team?
Absolutely. The guy was a general during the Civil War. He actually got involved in combat.
He was involved in combat, not like a logistical general, not like, oh, I'm the general in the quartermaster. I mean, I wasn't involved in combat during the war. Do not
downgrade Chester A. Arthur's involvement in the Civil War.
I mean, come on, man. I was a supply clerk for 2 years in the Army, and then I was in the infantry after that. Now, there's a difference.
If the question is, would I prefer a brigadier general in infantry over a brigadier general in quartermaster, I'm going to go with Benjamin Harrison as my general.
But that depends if you need to order stuff.
Oh, true. Like we would be in the middle of like killing a bunch of zombies, and it's like,
Yeah.
who ordered ammunition? Chester A. Arthur. Damn it. Picked the wrong president.
Because the quartermaster one has Amazon Prime, so he can get that delivered straight to you, right? The infantry run's like, I just like blowing up stuff. And
all right, but Derwin, would you want Benjamin Harrison on your side during a zombie fight?
I would want him because he seems like a guy who's B plus at everything in life, right? Not super outgoing, but he just kind of seems like he's hitting all of the basics. Like, hey, don't be a jerk, and we should not spend all the money, and let's not kill everyone. And like he just, from the research I did, he just seems consistent. So he's the guy that if you have like a compound, like in season 3 of The Walking Dead, when they're in the prison, he's the guy you want running the prison while people are going out and fighting the zombies, right? Because he seems like a quartermaster general. He seems like the sort of guy that you want to maintain a complicated structure during stressful periods of time. Although he hated being president, and like
he compared losing the election of 1892 to being released from prison.
There you go. But like and that just kind of makes me want him to be on my team more. Like, so he's not power hungry. He's probably has a healthy ego. To use a season 3 Walking Dead reference, he'll be Herschel and not Rick Grimes. Herschel before he gets decapitated by the governor.
And like Herschel, he had a great beard. Last president to have a beard. Bam. We got another title for Benjamin Harrison.
There you go.
All right. Well, I think that just about wraps it up on our 23rd president and our 4th episode of the Dead President Society podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for our next episode, in which we will be talking about the man who unfortunately pooped himself to death, Zachary Taylor. All right. Thank you very much. Signing off.